It's a pleasure to come out and speak to you guys and to be part of this first in-person session. You're great for coming out, and I've been looking forward to seeing you. Thank you to Daryl and to the sponsors of this series for bringing me up. I'm from Estero, Florida. I'm not from there. No one's from Florida. Raise your hand if you're from Florida. 2 people. Okay. So, but I live in Estero, Florida, which is halfway between Naples and Fort Myers. And I discovered this story about these very interesting people who founded Estero, and it turned out that it was a cult. So I thought, well, I need to find out more about that. As you probably heard from my bio, I wrote for lots of publications, and I, at one point, made my living off of ideas that I could come up with to sell to magazines and newspapers. So I thought, well, this is an idea. I want to cover these people who had all these strange beliefs and who founded a town. And the more I got into it, I found their journals that they left. I found photos. I found letters that they had written. I found train tickets. And I found textbooks. They had their own school. And they didn't seem completely insane, I'll say that. And I realized that writing a 2,000-word story wasn't going to get any deeper than just saying, weren't they kooky, right? And I felt like they deserved better, so I wrote this book about them, and I keep saying them. I will explain who they are in just a minute. I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about myself and about who we are as people, knowing that, coming from the liberal arts, you certainly understand how what history can teach us, and this is certainly an instance where history teaches you. So this is the book. I brought some for sale. It is written in the style of some of these. The Worst Hard Time, Devil in the White City sat on my desk the whole time I was writing this. Candace Millard is just a hero of mine. And so I wrote it reads like a novel, but I wrote it like it is a true story. So it follows a story arc. The story I'm going to tell you tonight takes place in Florida, where all good stories take place. This is a map from 1899. Our story begins 5 years before this, in 1894, with these people, the Koreshans, who came to Estero, Florida, to build Jerusalem, to build a city for 10 million people. That's what they believed. They were building a city for 10 million. Now they look pretty bedraggled and upset, because here's what they left. A mansion in Chicago, in Inglewood. Some of them got to stay at the mansion. Others of them came here to this mosquito-infested swamp that we know as Southwest Florida. And they were charged with beginning the building of this city. So they were called the Koreshans, and who were they? They were religious utopians. They formed a communal or socialist society where they shared everything. They believed that men and women were equal. They were very industrious. They formed many industries. And they believed that we lived inside of the earth. And that's what we're focusing on today. This is a picture of them pretty much at the height of the community in Estero. There were about 200 to 250 of them at the height. This was their leader. This was the man they worshiped. They believed he was the Messiah. His name was Cyrus Teed, you might be wondering why they were then called the Koreshans, and are they related to the branch Davidians, right? That's the first question everybody wants to know. So Cyrus believed many things, many of which were inscrutable, but he believed that he was Cyrus the Great, you know, from the Bible. And so, and his name happened to be Cyrus. And when you transliterate that into Hebrew, you get, from Cyrus, you get Koresh. Koresh. Now, David Koresh, born Vernon Howell, also changed his name to Cyrus or Koresh for the same reason. Both men, they are theologically related, no question about it. Both men believed that they were going to crack the 7 seals from Revelations, you know, and solve the Bible, solve that chapter. Both men believed they were Cyrus the Great. They were very theologically similar. There's even some evidence that the FBI in the Waco raid, the negotiators mentioned to David Koresh that this guy exists. Do you know anything about him? And he was very interested in it, but then they bulldozed the compound, and I don't think he ever got to find out about him. So that's the relationship, or not so much, to the Waco Koreshans. So he had a vision from an angel when he was 30. And she came to visit him and said, "You have been sent to redeem humanity." Now, some people believe that he just suffered an electric shock and went into some kind of spell. Some people believe it didn't happen at all and he made it all up. He was related to Joseph Smith, distantly related to Joseph Smith. He certainly would have known about Joseph Smith's visions, and a lot of the imagery in his vision was the same, right down to the colors. So this angel visited him. She said, "You've been sent to redeem humanity. You have a huge responsibility. You're going to face persecution. You know, go," right? And so he went about trying to convert people. He was a doctor. He was a doctor of eclectic medicine, which was actually a legitimate form of medicine at the time. And so he left his wife and went wandering around New York, the burned over district, trying to get people to believe in him. They would come to him having a sore knee, and he would say, "I'll fix it, and I'll charge this, and by the way, I'm the Messiah," and they would find another doctor. So he didn't have a lot of luck until he was invited to a mental health, mentalist or mental science convention where they practice faith healing. Mary Baker Eddy was very popular at that time, and he thought, maybe I'll hook into that somehow. He was still looking for his hook. So he went to Chicago, and he had some success, and people started following him. And that's how the mansion came about. But they needed more land if they were going to build a city for 10 million. The price in Estero was right, AKA free. They were having a lot of credit problems in Chicago. Paying for heating, gas was expensive. They had a lot of creditors. There were a lot of husbands who were mad at Cyrus Teed because he was stealing their wives. And the media was after him. This was the days of yellow journalism. So think of a guy who has all these weird things going on, who believes in the hollow earth, who's stealing wives, who's being sued, who's being chased by constables. He was catnip for yellow journalism. He had to go, right? He had to get out of Chicago. It just wasn't working. So he found this land, and he moved down. And there was another reason that this land was so attractive, and that is that it was on the coast, and it was where they might be able to prove that the earth was hollow. Now let me take you through this, because it took me a while to understand exactly what he thought. Here he is. I don't know if you can see this. He's the promulgator of a new and startling cellular cosmogony. We all know what that is, right? He believed that Estero was the cosmic vitalis of the universe. So here was the universe according to Cyrus Teed. The sun is not 93 million miles away, In fact, it's much closer because the diameter of the Earth is 8,000 miles. The Earth is 25,000 miles around, and it curves upward. It curves upward 8 inches per mile. So to try to envision that, imagine having an old-fashioned school globe, peeling off that paper board, cutting the globe in half, splitting it open, and repasting that paper board on the inside. So it's pretty imaginative, right? A lot of people had theorized about the hollow Earth, right? Jules Verne, Charles Sims, even Cotton Mather, but he was the first one. He seems to be the first one who said that we actually lived inside of the Earth. So we stand inside of the Earth's shell. What's more, the sun, the moon, the stars, the heavens, all of that was inside. Here's a model that still exists. It's at the Koreshan Art Hall in Estero. There's a historic site where they lived, and if you're ever down that way, I really recommend visiting it. It's fascinating. They've restored a lot of the buildings that they built. So this is a working model of the hollow Earth. You can see that the entire cosmos, in their theory, was contained within the globe. It was encased in lots of noble metals and finally in a layer of gold. Why? That was what I kept asking as writers, as people who love history. We're always asking, why? And I found my answer, I think. Why believe this, right? Science was advancing like crazy at this time in the late 1800s. You know, it was about the time Darwin was proposing his theory of evolution, magnetism, the periodic table of the elements. All sorts of huge scientific discoveries were going on. And Cyrus T knew that in order to attract followers, he needed to bridge faith and science somehow, because people of faith were freaking out, because science was threatening what they believed. So he promised, among other things, he promised to bridge those two. So they had a sense of humor about this. They sold lecture tickets saying, "We live inside, drop in and see us." They had lapel pins that said, "We live inside." I have a mask, a COVID mask, that says "We live inside." I tried to bring you guys some, and the park kind of shut me down on that one. So they're handmade. It's quite amazing. So here's the deal. Teed knew he needed to prove this scientifically, that we live inside the Earth, because otherwise no one was going to listen to him. This is sort of like the rapper B.O.B., the flat earther. Did you guys hear of him? He had a rocket. He tried to prove. Nobody knows about the rapper. Okay, when I talk to my kids about this, they're like, yeah, B.O.B. Okay, never mind. So he knew he had to prove scientifically that the Earth was hollow, and that thing about the curvature, 8 inches curving up 8 inches per mile. Don't worry, there won't be a test, a civil engineering test or anything like that at the end of this. I had to read the cliff notes to the cellular cosmogony to make sense of this. So, but if you look at this, you can see that if you're going to prove that the Earth curves upward, you need a way to run a straight line across the bottom of it, right? You're nodding like, well, of course. Yeah. So you're with me. So Teed found this guy. His name was Ulysses Grant Morrow. There's some very oddly named people walking through this book. He was a flat earther. He spent all of his time drawing graphs and diagrams of astronomy, and he was just enraptured by it. His wife said that astronomy and the Earth were her competition for his affections, right? And they ended up becoming Koreshans. And he wrote when he learned of Teed's hollow earth theory, he became infatuated with it. And he was ultimately convinced that Teed was correct, and he abandoned his flat earth research. And he wrote to Teed, "The skeleton I had erected has now crumbled before your cutting arguments, and I am free to examine Koreshan science with my mind, void of preconceived opinions." So he and his wife joined the Koreshans and then moved down. So he was a handy guy. He was always inventing useful things. And so he needed to invent, he knew, this apparatus. And this is what he created. It's called a rectilineator. And when I say, there's always titters in the crowd when I say rectilineator, right? Like, what were they doing with their rectums? But it's called that because it's a straight line, right? A straight angle. So this was his drawing for the rectilineator, and along the bottom, how they were planning to run it to prove that we lived inside the earth. So it was a giant ruler of sorts, and sort of, to me, looks like a horse corral fence that's missing its bottom crossbar. And there were several sections of it, which they meticulously lined up, and they were going to march them down the beach. This thing, there is a section of it that still exists in the art hall. In the 1890s, expert mechanics spent 4 weeks building the rectilineator to Ulysses' specifications. It was made of mahogany that had been seasoned for 12 years inside the shops of Pullman's Palace Car Company. Neat little thing. So once they had built it, they had a big party for the rectilineator, and they invited everyone in Chicago. So of course, journalists were excited. And there were some articles that I found about it when they circulated a densely worded event announcement. I don't know if you can read this. I've highlighted part of it. I'll just start reading the highlighted part. So they're wondering what's going to happen at the party, and they say, just what this testimony will be is kept a secret, but it is hinted that science is trembling on the verge of a great discovery. The residents of the suburb, some of them at least, have been greatly worried for years as to whether they were living on a flat or a spherical planet, or whether the Earth might not be a parallelepiped or a loon. Some of them, it is said, even have lain awake nights thinking of it, and it is with a sense of relief that some of them have received invitations to the, quote, party, which is to settle the question once and for all. So again, the press just shifted, oh, new story angle about this guy, Teed. He has stolen all these wives. Now he has invented a rectilineator, and he's going to the coast of Florida. So here they are on the beach in Naples. They had decided, they had tried some experimenting on inland waters, but they imagined some criticisms that people would say that inland waters did not conform to the curvature of the Earth. So clearly they needed to be on the Gulf, which would conform to the curvature of the Earth. Okay. They had their own letterhead made up. The scientific and geodetic civil engineering staff. This was typed by Ulysses. He was a very fast typist, and he typed in purple ink. Isn't that a neat detail? When black ink first came out, black typewriter ink, it was thought to be rude to type in black. So Ulysses always typed in purple because it was friendlier, more charming. So this map today gives you a sense of the challenge that they faced. They were starting at the red pinpoint at Naples Pier. They were going to run a straight line down the beach in sand, and then they're going to get to this gap called Gordon's Pass. But they had a plan. They were going to go 4 miles and then just go out into the water about 1.5 miles beyond Gordon's Pass. They were going to run airlines, and this is where they kind of lost me, but they had a plan. Ulysses had a ton of struggles. His typewriter that he had brought with him to the beach broke. There was a guy who rose up against him in the camp, claiming that the rectilineator was out of whack. There were terrible storms, but he was determined, and finally, after months of being on the beach, they began. A chest was moved along the line as the work progressed, with thermometer, microscope, calipers, rules, compass, spirit level, triangles, protractor, telescope, thumb bolts, adjusting gauges, celluloid test card, etc. They recorded their observations and measurements in the presence of all the witnesses. Signatures were obtained from the investigating committee and from several outside witnesses. Can you imagine looking on as these people are doing this and then being asked to sign a witness book? As luck would have it, their headquarters, there was a guy who was the publisher of the Louisville Courier-Journal, who owned a winter resort on Naples Beach, and the Koreshans were delighted when he offered them his place as their headquarters for the geodetic experiment. Now, why would a newspaper man want a front seat to this? Right? So he did have a front seat. The Koreshans had their headquarters, and they finally got to work. Here's another article about what they're doing, a party of cranks. I love the language from back then. The Koreshans claim to be scientific in their religious grasp. They have discovered that the Copernican system of astronomy is false, and they therefore teach cellular cosmogony. Of course, you all know what that is, no? Here's the headquarters. So they're moving the rectilineator down the beach. Ulysses is undaunted by all of the struggles they have faced, all the storms, all of the enemies in the camp that they've had to get rid of. And he has heard that Alfred Nobel has just died, right? And that there is to be a Swedish prize. And he thinks, I'm going to apply for that in advance, so that once we complete our work, we can be given the Swedish prize. The problem was, Alfred Nobel's heirs were still fighting tooth and nail. There was no prize yet at that point. And there was no proof that the world was, but you know, the earth is trembling on the verge of a great scientific discovery. So here is his letter to one of his friends. And he says, this is from Ulysses in purple ink. I have the item concerning the Swedish University and the Nobel bequest, and had thought of sending in an application in advance so that when we had completed our work, they may be ready to decide and give us the benefit of the sum annually. Here's some of the people who were asked to witness, just if you were standing out on the beach that day, or visiting Mr. Kentucky man, you would be asked to witness, and you can see lots of people went into the notebook as witnesses. Here they are at Gordon Pass, where they're leaving the land. This is a map of the coastline showing the pass. You can see that big gap. And these are the Koreshans having proved to their satisfaction that the world is hollow and we live inside. So Teed and Ulysses publish a book called The Cellular Cosmogony, which turns out in a weird way to be even further proof that it's true, right? So you prove it's true, and then you publish something, and then by virtue of having the book published, it's true, right? You're familiar with that, okay. It's kind of like a loop. It's not good. All right, so they come out with this, which is widely hailed as a masterpiece of pseudoscience. If you ever have a chance to read The Cellular Cosmogony, don't, because it is just inscrutable, but masterpiece of pseudoscience. So I want to fast forward to the 1940s. Cyrus Teed died in 1908. Once he died, he had not really tapped any successor. He had all the answers, right? He was going to make these people immortal. They were celibate. The idea was that if you harness your sexual energy, and this was not all that unusual, the perfectionists believe this too, harnessing your sexual energy could make you immortal, in short. There's some kind of odd specifics to it having to do with the pineal gland. But so after he died, though, the original Koreshans started aging. There weren't any new Koreshans coming in because they were celibate and they weren't having good luck recruiting. So over time, there weren't many Koreshans left. And in 1940, Fox Movietone News somehow heard this story and went down to this, outpost and decided, we're going to try to find these people who believe that we live in the center of the earth, and we're going to talk to them, right? And so they find the son of one of the original, of Teed's bestie, actually, who's still a Koreshan, still there, and has that model of the globe that I just showed you. And he describes for Fox Movietone News the experiment on Naples Beach. So I'd like to play that for you. It's a very bad tape. But Fox Movietone was envisioning that they might play this as a reel before a feature film. There's no evidence that it ever made it to the theaters.
In the winter of 1896 and 97, the geodetic staff of the Koreshan Unity of Estero, Florida, conducted a survey on the Gulf shore at Naples, Florida. This survey covered a period of several months, demonstrating conclusively that the Earth curves upward and that we are living on the inner surface of a hollow globe. Sun, moon, and stars all being within the circumference of 25,000 miles. We have here a working model of the hollow globe, or cellular cosmogony, as we call it. Here, on the inner surface of the great shell, you will see the western hemisphere, and over here is the eastern hemisphere. Here is the sphere of the heavens revolving with suns, moon, and stars. Contrary to the usual belief that China is beneath our feet, it is in reality above us.
I gotta wonder how the Koreshans would have been received had they been alive to what? He has a Twitter account? And he's referring people to me? Oh my goodness. What a mess that man is. No, but I have to wonder what the Koreshans would, how they would be received today with social media. Because social media really amplifies information. I don't know if you've noticed that. Is anybody on Facebook? Some people are kind of like, so I kind of think, we will never have the answer. They would have been able to get the word out, certainly. But I kind of think when there is something that has been established so long ago, Copernicus was around for a while, right? It's been a minute. And there's also no great fear or economic incentive for picking up this belief. And I think you've got to have, if there's going to be misinformation and cherry-picked science, there needs to be an element of emotion or fear or economic incentive. So just plant that. But mainly before the Koreshans, the truth had been established for a long time, and there was no great fear or economic incentive to take it seriously that would motivate someone to take it seriously. So what does this have to do with you? There you are. You probably know where I'm going with this. There are a lot of beliefs and misinformation and cherry-picked science and misinformation that does get traction. Maybe you can think of some examples of that. That wearing a mask causes pneumonia, that ivermectin is a safe and effective treatment for COVID. All of this, appears on social media, and social media companies, they can't keep up with it all. So, like the Koreshans, we live in our own sort of hollow earths. We live in our filter bubbles. Who really loves talking to people who annoy them, who they disagree with, who are angry? Nobody, no takers? No. We would prefer, to stay in our own filter bubble. And social media companies know that. They know how to keep us on the site. But it has led to a lot of polarization. People hold different opinions about why polarization occurs. And I could talk about that. My most recent research is about that. But the good news is that we can escape those filter bubbles. First, though, I want to go over kind of what a filter bubble is. I'm going to show you a TED Talk, short TED Talk from the guy who invented the phrase. He's a super smart guy. His name is Eli Pariser. Maybe you've heard of him. And this is from 10 years ago, which is especially interesting when you listen to it. It's kind of like it could have been filmed last night, except that he makes a reference to Netflix DVDs being mailed. Remember that? So that'll seem a little odd, but other than that, it's kind of amazing that he gave this talk 10 years ago. So let's have a listen, and he's explaining how social media builds those filter bubbles.
Mark Zuckerberg, a journalist, was asking him a question about the news feed. And the journalist was asking him, why is this so important? And Zuckerberg said, a squirrel dying in your front yard may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. And I want to talk about what a web based on that idea of relevance might look like. So when I was growing up in a really rural area in Maine, the internet meant something very different to me. It meant a connection to the world. It meant something that would connect us all together. And I was sure that it was going to be great for democracy and for our society. But there's this kind of shift in how information is flowing online. And it's invisible. And if we don't pay attention to it, it could be a real problem. So I first noticed this in a place I spend a lot of time, my Facebook page. I'm progressive politically, big surprise, but I've always gone out of my way to meet conservatives. I like hearing what they're thinking about. I like seeing what they link to. I like learning a thing or two. And so I was kind of surprised when I noticed one day that the conservatives had disappeared from my Facebook feed. And what it turned out was going on was that Facebook was looking at which links I clicked on. And it was noticing that actually I was clicking more on my liberal friends' links than on my conservative friends' links. And without consulting me about it, it had edited them out. They disappeared. So Facebook isn't the only place that's doing this kind of invisible algorithmic editing of the web. Google's doing it too. If I search for something and you search for something, even right now at the very same time, we may get very different search results. Even if you're logged out, one engineer told me, there are 57 signals that Google looks at. Everything from what kind of computer you're on, to what kind of browser you're using, to where you're located, that it uses to personally tailor your query results. Think about it for a second. There is no standard Google anymore. And the funny thing about this is that it's hard to see. You can't see how different your search results are from anyone else's. But a couple of weeks ago, I asked a bunch of friends to Google Egypt and to send me screenshots of what they got. So here's my friend Scott's screenshot. And here's my friend Daniel's screenshot. When you put them side by side, you don't even have to read the links to see how different these two pages are. But when you do read the links, it's really quite remarkable. Daniel didn't get anything about the protests in Egypt at all in his first page of Google results. Scott's results were full of them. And this was the big story of the day at that time. That's how different these results are becoming. So it's not just Google and Facebook either. This is something that's sweeping the web. There are a whole host of companies that are doing this kind of personalization. Yahoo News, the biggest news site on the internet, is now personalized. Different people get different things. Huffington Post, the Washington Post, New York Times, all flirting with personalization in various ways. And where this moves us very quickly toward a world in which the internet is showing us what it thinks we want to see, but not necessarily what we need to see. As Eric Schmidt said, it'll be very hard for people to watch or consume something that has not, in some sense, been tailored for them. So I do think this is a problem. And I think if you take all of these filters together, if you take all of these algorithms, you get what I call a filter bubble. And your filter bubble is kind of your own personal, unique universe of information that you live in online. And what's in your filter bubble depends on who you are, and it depends on what you do. But the thing is that you don't decide what gets in. And more importantly, you don't actually see what gets edited out. So one of the problems with the filter bubble was discovered by some researchers at Netflix. And they were looking at the Netflix queues, and they noticed something kind of funny that a lot of us probably have noticed, which is there are some movies that just sort of zip right up and out to our houses. They enter the queue, they just zip right out. So Iron Man zips right out, right? And waiting for Superman can wait for a really long time. What they discovered was that in our Netflix queues, there's kind of this epic struggle going on between our future aspirational selves and our more impulsive present selves. We all want to be someone who has watched Rashomon. But right now, we want to watch Ace Ventura for the 4th time. So the best editing gives us a bit of both. It gives us a little bit of Justin Bieber and a little bit of Afghanistan. It gives us some information vegetables. It gives us some information dessert. And the challenge with these kind of algorithmic filters, these personalized filters, is that because they're mainly looking at what you click on first, it can throw off that balance. And instead of a balanced information diet, you can end up surrounded by information junk food. So what this suggests is actually that we may have the story about the internet wrong. In a broadcast society, this is how the founding mythology goes, right? In a broadcast society, there were these gatekeepers, the editors, and they controlled the flows of information. And along came the internet, and it swept them out of the way, and it allowed all of us to connect together, and it was awesome. But that's not actually what's happening right now. What we're seeing is more of a passing of the torch from human gatekeepers to algorithmic ones. And the thing is that the algorithms don't yet have the kind of embedded ethics that the editors did. So if algorithms are going to curate the world for us, if they're going to decide what we get to see and what we don't get to see, then we need to make sure that they're not just keyed to relevance. We need to make sure that they also show us things that are uncomfortable or challenging or important. This is what TED does, right? Other points of view. And the thing is, we've actually kind of been here before as a society. In 1915, it's not like newspapers were sweating a lot about their civic responsibilities. Then people kind of noticed that they were doing something really important. That in fact, you couldn't have a functioning democracy if citizens didn't get a good flow of information. That the newspapers were critical because they were acting as the filter, and that journalistic ethics developed. It wasn't perfect, but it got us through the last century. And so now, we're kind of back in 1915 on the web. And we need the new gatekeepers to encode that kind of responsibility into the code that they're writing. I know there are a lot of people here from Facebook and from Google, Larry and Sergey, people who have helped build the web as it is, and I'm grateful for that. But we really need you to make sure that these algorithms have encoded in them a sense of the public life, a sense of civic responsibility. We need you to make sure that they're transparent enough that we can see what the rules are that determine what gets through our filters. And we need you to give us some control so that we can decide what gets through and what doesn't. Because I think we really need the internet to be that thing that we all dreamed of it being. We need it to connect us all together. We need it to introduce us to new ideas and new people and different perspectives. And it's not going to do that if it leaves us all isolated in a web of one. Thank you. Thank you.
So I think that really summarizes a lot of what, that was 10 years ago, and we've seen that the social media companies have not done much to tailor the algorithms to enhance democracy. And so how do we escape that, right? And this is where you're not gonna like me, because in order to escape it, you've got to challenge yourself. You have to get in that line on the right. Can everyone read that? On the left it says comforting lies, and on the right it says unpleasant truths. Yeah. So when you get out of your filter bubble, there are certain things that you have to face, and some of them involve your own biases. But I'm going to give you just some very basic tips for how you can escape. One is recognize the difference between reporting, opinion, and just bloviation, right? And we think that we're good at that, but we're not. We tend to listen to opinion that is dressed up like news instead of looking at and dissecting real reporting, which does still exist, but it's getting crowded out. I can teach you how to sidestep some of those algorithms. I'm just going to give you my favorite tools, just a couple, because we can't be here all night. But you can sidestep those algorithms, and you can find out how Facebook has pegged you, right? What it thinks you want to see. And then just be really deliberate about the information you consume. No one is chaining you to your couch, making you watch MSNBC or Fox News. So knowing the difference between news reporting informs, opinion journalism, and by this I mean good opinion pieces, they inform too, but they persuade at the same time. And then knowing the difference between opinion journalism and bloviation. You probably recognize Alex Jones. So here's a cartoon that shows it. And I know the writing is small, but it says, "I'm sorry, Jeannie, your answer was correct, but Kevin shouted his incorrect answer over yours, so he gets the points." Yeah, so what's happening is we're in an atmosphere where really vocal minorities, right, because they have the megaphone, they drive the conversation. George Saunders wrote an amazing essay called The Brain Dead Megaphone, and he starts the essay with someone at a party. Someone comes into a party where everyone's talking, having a great time, and the guy with the megaphone just steers the conversation away. So we're seeing that happen, and we can ignore the bloviation. This is a media leanings chart, which some of you might have seen before. It's much too small on the screen for you to see, but just so you know, you can find it at Adfontes Media, ADFONTES Media. It's a pretty good chart of where certain media companies fall on the spectrum from center to right to left. You want to stay in the green and yellow zones. The red zones are just junk. So it can be really interesting to go, and if you just Google media leanings chart, you'll find it. And just see what you're reading. Where does it fall, you know? That can help you. And then maybe challenge yourself. Stay in the green zone, right? But if you tend to read, you know, the Wall Street Journal all the time, read the New York Times, or vice versa. So here's a good tool, NewsGuard. It's called the Internet Trust Tool. So it gives trust ratings for the news sites that account for 95% of engagement. It's written by journalists, not by secret algorithms, and it's transparent and accountable. It's a Chrome extension that you can download. It gives a nutrition label for the news. So a couple of tools I promised you for defeating the algorithms. You can see who Facebook thinks you are, and you can change it. So there is a section on interests. This is not my Facebook. I just pulled up a graphic of it. But under interests, you can go and see what it has marked, and it tells you why it has marked you this way. And you can hit the little X to make it go away. But then it keeps tracking you and it knows more about you, right? You can search incognito. This is on Chrome, but this has the benefit that it's not able to collect data about you as you're searching. Here's another DuckDuckGo. We have somebody who's heard of that. Do you use it?
I do.
Okay. Tell me what you like about it.
Well, I do get a lot less choices.
Okay.
They do seem to be of higher quality.
Okay. The nice thing about DuckDuckGo is it doesn't track you. It doesn't see where you're going and then use that data, right? It's all about data. These sites don't care about you. Social media companies don't care about you, right? They're just really good at making it seem like they do, right? You're in this caring place with all your friends and they think alike, and yeah, it makes you feel good. So DuckDuckGo, searching incognito, you can reset your Twitter timeline. Right now, you might not be aware of it, but it defaults to just show you what it thinks you're gonna think the best tweets are. So you can turn that off so that you see the tweets chronologically instead of letting it tell you what it thinks you're gonna want. Which might be right, these algorithms are great, right? But why not challenge yourself? So being active and deliberate, and part of that is actually going to the site, right? So if you're gonna follow ABC News, go to the ABC News site, as opposed to just getting something forwarded to you or reading the little capsule on Twitter. Go to the Wall Street Journal site. And yes, subscribe to your local paper. There's a reason there's a paywall. It costs money. Information is free. Journalism is not free. A couple of other tools, and I'm almost to the end of these. You can open your social media feed to see new points of view. And flip feed is especially weird and creepy. You can actually just step into a random person's Twitter feed. Yeah, so you might want to try flip feed. And then read across the aisle is sort of a lot like All Sides. So this is a screenshot from All Sides from earlier today. It shows you the news story, and then it shows you how it's being covered from the center, from the left, and from the right. And this is a story that we're all following right now. And that's pretty darn useful, because it shows you that there's more than one way that it's being reported. And it really opens your eyes. It's like, oh, that's what my friend is reading? You know, no wonder we can't have a conversation. So I've got some credits for this presentation. I'm going to show you something kind of creepy and amazing. So a lot of the historical photos from the first part of the presentation are from archives, and I'm really grateful to these archivists for sharing them with me. The State Archives of Florida and the library archives at my school, FGCU. Some of the news literacy tips that I shared with you come from the Stony Brook Center for News Literacy. I believe everyone needs to educate themselves about news literacy. Even those of us, most of us are about the same age, right? We came up in this generation where Walter Cronkite was our gatekeeper and we could trust him. He was America's most trusted man in news. We don't have that anymore. We have to do it ourselves. And news literacy gives you tools for deconstructing news to know what is reliable, actionable, credible. So I'm going to show you something weird. Here's our man, Mr. Teed, from the first part of the presentation. I want you to focus on his profile.
Looks like Jeff Daniels.
Jeff Daniels, he does. Nobody's ever said that before, but he does kind of look like Jeff Daniels. So I want you to focus on his profile. And now I'm going to switch the slide and tell me what you see. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that the archivist discovered long after I wrote the book, and I thought it was just really creepy. So there is one more tip that I would give you, and that is to look to history, you know, to help you through this. There have been times, just like Eli Pariser said, you know, we're almost back to 1915 again. Things just come around again. So do look to history to educate yourself about what's happening today and what you can put in context. Here's Cyrus Teed's signature. I've got some of my books here that I'm happy to sign for you. And Cyrus Teed can also sign them for you. He couldn't be here tonight. He wanted me to say hi to everyone. But thanks to modern technology, and thanks to the fact that he left his signature everywhere, I was able to grab a high resolution image of it and put it on a stamp, an ink stamp. So if you buy a book tonight, you can have it signed not only by me, but by Cyrus the Great, the Messiah. Pretty good. And if you'd rather buy it on Amazon, you can just point your camera toward that dinosaur and it takes you there. I think that's it. So thank you very much.